Good evening, Julian McBain here, and this is my 18th Saturday vlog. So, real quick, I'm back on Calypso. If you hadn't noticed, I'm just going to be hunting some curbs for giggles. But what I want to discuss tonight a little bit is some philosophy, I think. And I've been doing a lot of reading, or I should say I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks, because that's what I do. I listen to audiobooks while I walk. And currently I've been listening to Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning, which is his much denser work and older work. But I think what I'm also going to be doing is I just downloaded an Intro to Philosophy book that was free. It's about 200 pages long. Looks like it's an intro book, but for an intro book, it looks like it's fairly thorough on the basics, and so I'm going to read that, I think, in the coming weeks. And I just got to thinking of, why am I so deep into philosophy all of a sudden? And I know it's not because I'm bored. Because if I was bored, I wouldn't be this damn tired. But I think it's because, and I'm going to tie it right back to when I was first initiated as a Mason. It's made me reflect upon who I am as a person, and I want to know where I fit within the architecture of the world. And so I'm finding myself going back and looking for different thought processes on how the world is supposed to work. And philosophy is kind of at the root of it. I feel that philosophy is the architecture upon which we build the world around us, because each of us has our own individualized perception. And I don't think that any of us really has reality down pat. Interestingly, I've read from several sources that the better view you have of... Oh, that's Ghost Armor, okay. I'm pretty sure that's Ghost Armor. The more clear view you have of reality, the more likely you are to suffer from depression. Which is really telling. Is the world so horrendous that if you see it for what it is, you're more likely to be depressed? And so that really kind of caught my eye, and that's when I started going into the psychological and philosophical rounds. And of course, Dr. Peterson says that his term is the tragedy of life, and I don't buy that. I don't buy that life itself is a tragedy, but I do think that life is a series of traumas, and I've said this in my previous vlogs. And at some point in our lives, we're all traumatized, and we're going to be traumatized over and over and over again. It's how we build ourselves. Is how do we make it through these traumas? And the architecture upon which we build that structure is the philosophy that we keep. And I mean, there are a number of philosophies out there. Every religion has its own philosophy, and there's plenty of stuff on that, so I'm not really going to get into it. Except maybe Buddhism briefly, because I don't feel that, and you can argue it both ways, but I don't really see Buddhism as a religion per se, so much as a philosophy, because I've met Buddhists of other religions. So I'm not convinced that, strictly speaking, it's a specific religion so much as a philosophy of life. But anyway, you've got other philosophies out there as well. Like, I think the one that I mostly attribute to myself is Stoicism, and a modern form of Stoicism, because like a lot of philosophies, there's a lot of metaphysics involved, and I'm not sure I buy into the original metaphysics of the Greeks on Stoicism. I'd have to reread it and go back through it and things like that. But Stoics tended to live fairly austere lives. Not too austere, but austere enough in comparison. And so, since that's how I've often lived my life, whether deliberately or no, I often find myself thinking in that mode of being. There we go. And so you know, you're stoic. You don't let things affect you as much as you can, or insofar as you can prevent them from affecting you. And that right there is a difficult challenge on its own, because humans are emotional creatures. What is that? Oh, that's my frickin'... Okay. Oh, okay. Because my... I get it now. And if I bring this up, it doesn't work. Okay, okay, okay. Where was I? Philosophy... Oh, philosophy and stoicism. So, I mean, realistically speaking, I'm a bit of a stoic, and I try to let things just kind of slide off me. I'm not always successful. And if someone says that they're always successful in letting things slide off of them, they're probably lying to you. But at the same time, it's kind of a key point where you don't let the frustration get to you, and you have to keep going. And again, sometimes I'm more successful than others, but I find it to be a very useful philosophy to keep to, or at least a form of self-discipline. And maybe that's what philosophy is all about. It's about self-discipline and knowing how to rein yourself in a way where you can be of the most benefit to yourself and those around you. And something I've had to come to grips with is you really should only be like that for those who actually want to be beneficial to you as well. And that's kind of a hard thing to come to grips with, because, you know, the world has a lot of toxic people in it. And a lot of the people who are toxic might not even intend to be toxic. And that right there was something hard for me to grapple with. I'm still grappling with that one. But there are people out there that are toxic for specific individuals, and there are people out there that are just toxic in general. And some of the people that are toxic in general, or even especially the ones that are toxic to specific individuals, probably don't intend it. And those who are toxic to everyone, I would dare say, likely don't intend it. It's just the way they are. There's a flaw in the personality, or they don't have the capacity to understand the harm they are doing to this other person. And I mean, that's not very hard. I mean, we're incredibly complex, and part of that complexity is we always orient ourselves relative to other people in a manner that we perceive. And so for instance, if I had a friend named Bob, and my perception of Bob is X, and Bob's perception of, and my perception of how Bob perceives me would be Y, well, Bob actually perceives me as A, and Bob thinks I perceive him as B. And the thing is that A, B, X, and Y aren't going to be that far off from each other. X and A and Y and B are going to be not that far off from each other, but because of individual differences of experience that we have learned across time, I think that's what really kind of keys in on that difference. And because of that altered experience, we don't necessarily know precisely how we're perceived by other people. And it's not like they can really describe it to us. It's not... Perception is something that you really can't describe to other people. I mean, let's just look at the color palette. You know, when I see the color red, my brain is interpreting light waves. And I see the color red. But does the red for me look like red to other people? Does my eye interpret? More importantly, does my brain translate red with the same modal shades. Now, humans are biological creatures, and 99% of that's biological processes, so my guess would be yes within a certain degree of temperature, color temperature, and a certain range of detail, because everyone's going to be able to process a certain number of shades. Interestingly, I believe women are able to process something like 2 or 3 times the number of individual shades that men are, which is why, you know, when you see a shade of pink described as salmon or salmon red, and you have a whole bunch of men going, no, that's pink. So that's interesting, and that would be something I would want to do more research into. Is that endemic? What was the cause of that? Is there a biological reason for that discrepancy? Or is it just a certain demographic of persons that are like that? I would also be interested, because of course cones and rods help you see in the dark, and cones perceive color. I have to wonder if people who are colorblind can see well in the dark relative to people who aren't. I mean, just because they don't have the cones doesn't mean they have rods to make up for it, but there is a distinct possibility. Most of our senses will make up for deficiencies in themselves, or the other second senses will make up for deficiencies in them, to the point where there are blind people who can use echolocation. Think about that for 2 seconds. There are humans capable of using echolocation. That is insane. And they do it because they can't see, and so they see with their ears, much the way that bats do. And contrary to popular belief, bats are not blind. There might be 1 or 2 species that are, but by and large, bats are not blind. They just hunt in the dark. And so, since, of course, bats themselves can't see in the dark, because they're mammals, and mammals generally can't see in the dark, although some can see in the dark better than others. For instance, I think that the ability to see in the dark is better for dogs than it is for humans. It's better for cats, most definitely. But I'm pretty sure cats can't see color at all, or can't perceive it in the same manner that we do. And I don't know that it would be grayscale for them. That doesn't make sense either, but I would be curious to see how a cat sees into the world. Especially since their eyes are really designed to track motion, as opposed to specific objects. You know, there's a joke on the internet that, you know, God created the perfect killing machine, and that was the cat. And then he decided as a cosmic joke to make it 8 pounds, which is why cats are always pissed off. I find that to be kind of a profound philosophical funny, but that's just me. So philosophy forms the architecture in which we perceive the world, and we build upon that architecture our experience. But how much of that architecture is provided by philosophy, and how much of the building of our perception is formed by experience? And I think what it is, and I'm going to get into some terminology here. I'm going to use a stone building kind of as a basis for obvious reasons. And no, before the conspiracy theorist jumps on, you're not hearing anything that's secret knowledge. So, bleh. So if philosophy's the foundation, the framework, then I think that our experience is the bricks, or our experiences are the bricks that build the building. So, and every trauma is a flaw in a brick. Or it might be a larger stone, because traumas don't necessarily break us, although we can be a human can get fairly broken and still be functional. or even incredibly functional in the world. So let's say that every experience is a brick, and let's say the traumas are the pillars that hold up the facade on the outside. Those are the things that really define the finer parts of who we are, or how we handle those traumas throughout our life. And so, if our experiences are the bricks and our traumas are the pillars, then the mortar that holds it all together are the people we surround ourselves with. Because without a social group, even the most introverted person has a social group of some sort. And there are groups that really made up of introverts so that they can have that socialization, because we're social creatures. We are pack animals. Humans hardly, only in the modern age do humans hunt alone. And while there are those of us, including myself, who really appreciates our solitude, at the same time, without some sort of human interaction, we would probably just wither away and die. We are by nature social animals, even if the amount of socialization that we require is very, very small. And I think that's kind of where the divide between extroversion... extroversion is one of the big 5 personality traits. It's also part of the MBTI, which is, I think, going the way of the dodo in exchange for the big 5 personality traits. I think that I've taken a big 5 test, and I've taken the MBTI, and the MBTI only changed once, because I went from an INTP to an INTJ, and I'm not entirely sure what caused that change, because my assumption was your personality is your personality, but we do evolve over time. And so I think that the big 5 will likely be more accurate in the long run, because it's measuring things like openness and extroversion and conscientiousness, and there are 2 more, and I'm going to look it up because it's going to annoy me. And big 5, there we go. Okay, so it's extroversion, agreeableness, openness, conscientiousness, and neuroticism. I'm fairly certain I'm fairly high on neuroticism. I'm willing to bet. I took a quick test one morning. I didn't give myself enough time to complete it properly. And when you rush tests like that, you either get a super accurate picture or you didn't read the question right. And in my case, I probably didn't read the question right, so I want to take it again and actually record the results. Okay, so you know what? Better yet, instead of traumas being the pillars, your big 5 personality traits are the pillars. Your traumas are flaws in the bricks, and your experiences are the bricks themselves. And then your social group, your family, your friends, your coworkers, those are the mortar that hold the whole thing together. And then I guess at that point, you ask the question, what's the roof? And that's a good question, because I didn't really think of that, but honestly, I think that the roof is I think the roof is your faith. And I know I'm going to get some rolled eyes out there, but hear me out. Even outside of a strictly religious context, even an atheist has faith in something, the universe themselves, their particular philosophy. But the roof kind of caps the whole thing off and keeps it together and keeps the rain out. And this is why humans hate changing their opinions. And so whether your faith is religious or atheist or whatever, I don't care. You've got the foundation of philosophy, the personality, the pillars of your personality, the bricks of your experience, the mortar of your social group, and the roof of your faith. And I think that these really kind of build the building that is the life that you live. And when it comes time for you to shake off the mortal coil and move on to whatever might or might not come next, you leave behind this building that other people position themselves relative to, because even after you're gone, even if that building were, even after you're gone, a piece of you lives on in their memories, and those bricks stay standing until eventually the last memory of you disappears. Now think about this for a minute. Does the last memory of you disappear, truly disappear in the end? And I'm not convinced it does, because memories of you or of your experiences or experiences had with you will live on in your friend, the social group that forms the mortar of your building. Will you also help form the mortar of other buildings, other people's perceptions, and that helps to form their position in the world. And so other people then, people even you don't know, will position themselves relative to that building, and you are part of that mortar. So I mean, hell, things that you do today might affect how someone 7 generations down the road does things. And you may not even have to publish it. It might just be a best practice that you help to develop that's still being used by whatever organization you're a member of right now, or organizations are still using 10, 15, 50 years down the road. 2, 4, 8 generations. I mean, hell, just look at, case in point, just look at the military. Basic military drill and ceremony hasn't changed in 400 years. I'm willing to bet if you put an American colonial soldier, part of the Continental Army, or better yet, part of the first army after the Revolution, because during the Revolution things were pretty tough, but the first truly uniformed soldiers of the American Army, the United States Army under George Washington, and tell them to drill alongside a modern soldier, after handling all the culture shock issues and everything like that, and make sure that everyone can communicate, because our ancestors in the 1700s spoke Middle English. It was early by 1778. It was, or 1776 to 78, because the revolution, I think, ended in 78 or 79? Maybe it was 7? No, it couldn't have ended in 77. It was more than a year. I thought it was 4. Anyway, on topic. Tangents. I'm willing to bet the drill and ceremony has not changed a whole hell of a lot. Certainly not since the Civil War, where even the calling of commands, although the words were often reversed, like today we would say, company, attention. Back then it was attention, company. And so even though the words have reversed, you still have the preparatory command and the command of execution. And then right shoulder arms has been right shoulder arms for 200 years, if not more. I mean, since the modern musket came out, and I say the modern musket because we don't use muskets anymore, but ever since the modern rifle came out, and going back to black powder weapons, the musket and the old hunting rifle, to today's assault weapons, the drill itself hasn't changed. I mean, right through World War II, the shape of the rifle didn't change a whole hell of a lot. And when I was on ROTC, we were throwing 10-pound M1 Grands. That's 10 pounds of rifle we're tossing in the air to drill with them and catching. I didn't. I was twirling, but I did not throw and catch, but I know people who could. I would be curious to see if they retain the skill. But the practices taught 300 years ago, a lot of them are still relevant today. That's just one example. Military musicians, I think, went out of style in World War I, and military musicians have been part of the military since the classic era. The Romans used trumpeters to dictate orders across different legions and centuries, just like they did during the Middle Ages, and all the way through. I would probably say the beginning of World War I is when we started to see the end of that type of Napoleonic tactic. Because the development of the machine gun really changed stuff, and this is supposed to be more about philosophy and not about warfare, but there is a lot of philosophy embedded in warfare. And if you want to learn philosophy, you really need to make sure that you check the... I mean, there's the obvious ones, Machiavelli, Sun Tzu, but if you read the strategic treaties on, and I know I'm pronouncing that wrong, read literature on how Napoleon did warfare, and tell me you don't see a philosophy in it. Because Napoleon was incredibly intelligent. A little too arrogant for his own good, but incredibly intelligent. And it took two incredibly intelligent generals to take him down at Waterloo. I mean, we're talking about someone who just, like, walked over everybody. Case in point. So, France and Germany, or its predecessors, so France and Prussia at the time, but France and Germany have gone to war probably a dozen times in their history in what could be considered modern France and modern Germany, or the predecessors to modern France and modern Germany. They've probably gone to war a dozen times over the years, but the only time the French really had a solid lead over Germany without a whole bunch of allies was when Napoleon was the emperor. No, Napoleon walked all over the Prussians because he knew how to screen the better part of their force and take out flankers. It was largely not a tried and true tactic at the time. You could, like, put a light screen out to kind of push the enemy back in an individual battle, but not on a grand scale. And Napoleon knew how to split his forces effectively and concentrate his force on pieces of the enemy's army. So what he would do is he'd find where the bulk of the enemy army was going, and he'd throw the screen over there. And then the bulk of his army would engage the smaller force that was trying to flank him. And after he was done wiping out the smaller force, his screen, which was semi-sacrificial but not entirely, because he wanted those men to survive so that he could go back and pick them up and be bigger than the rest of the main army that the Germans were using, would then turn around and outflank the Germans and just completely demolish them. It was a brilliant tactic for the time. I mean, even today it would work fairly well, understanding that today we have tanks and planes and spy satellites. It wouldn't work nearly as well because, I mean, reconnaissance today is by and large just droves over what they could do back then. But if you were to take away all the technology and just be back to rifles and basic artillery, even World War II technology, if you disregard nuclear weapons because they were very short-lived at the very end, and possibly certain aerial, no, even leaving Jetson, because let's face it, the Messerschmitt 262, the Messerschmitt jet was not a great aircraft, comparatively speaking. You know, and a P-51 Mustang could take out a Messerschmitt. The Messerschmitt was just faster. But those V12 Rolls-Royces are not to be contended with. And so, even as near as World War II, that type of tactic would have to a certain extent worked. And I think Rommel probably did use those tactics in Africa. I think that's why he got so far. You know, I mean, he was sharp as a tack. And it might seem bad for me to respect an enemy general, but I mean, seriously, look at the way he did things. You can not agree with someone and still respect their intelligence. But anyway, from a philosophical standpoint, I'm grappling with everything that I'm kind of absorbing, and so I'm really enjoying it. This is quite the journey I've been on since January. I've got several of my goals put together, and that's kind of what I did. Is I listened to 12 Rules for Life, and that started to build a philosophical starting point for me to reset my life. And now I'm just building upon it. And so this journey has been really interesting. I'm curious as to see where it goes next. I don't know where it's going to wind up. But you know what? That's part of the fun. Find my way back home. There it is. So, no, shit. So, I hope the tangents didn't throw you off too much. But this is now kind of insight into the way Julian McBain thinks. Tangents, tangents. I used to have a roommate, still a friend, named Cypher, and in a lot of ways our views differ, sometimes very significantly, but one of the things him and I could do is we could talk for hours about various things. And one of the things that we'd always joke about is one of us, if not both of us, would tangent. And so after probably the first year and a half that we lived together, if one of us realized we were running off on a tangent in our thought process, we just go tangents, tangents, and then we get back to the original plot of discourse. Wow, the original subject of what we were talking about. It was a lot of fun, you know. And I mean, him and I disagree with a lot of stuff, but I think that the fact that we were able to disagree and yet still remain friends, I think, was very important. And I think that's something that a lot of us today really have to contend with. We're having trouble with that. And so, you know, just in his words, be excellent to each other. It's not that hard. So, okay, folks, I'm off. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe down below. Please make sure you check out my sponsor at Critical Links. That's etsy.com/pages/Critical Links, where she does all this beautiful chainmail jewelry. Go check it out, really. You owe it to yourself to take a look. And if you don't find something that you like, she does custom work. Go check her out. Critical Links is at www.etsy.com/pages/Critical Links. Go check her out today. Guys, thank you so much for all of your support. You all have a wonderful night.